Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for this afternoon session, which is going to be hosted by Virtu. We're very proud partners with them and are very grateful for their support as we do this session on success and service. My name is Keisha Javis Jones. I'm the programs director here at Foundation for Women Warriors. I oversee all of our program and program operations. So you'll receive a follow-up email directly following this call about our programs and a brief survey about this experience. So please take a minute to respond. And of course, if you need support through any of our other programs, please reach out to us. I'm going to hand it over to Ramona Espinoza as I've been working with her very closely, and this wouldn't be possible without her. So, Ramona, thank you so much for all of your work on this. Please share a little bit more about what they're going to experience today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ramona Espinosa. I've been with Virtu now for 25 years. We've been working with the Women Foundation now. I think our relationship goes back to like 2012 or so,
Yeah.
but we've been doing this consistently now for like the last 4 years or so, which is great. And we're super excited about this continuous partnership. Just to give you a recap of what you could expect today. So today we're going to have a panel that's going to focus on resume building, the do's and don'ts of interviews. A lot of the panelists come from different backgrounds at Virtu. We do have HR in here. They are brilliant, smart individual and have a lot of experience in this field. So I feel like they'll be providing a lot of insightful advice. Um, just remember this whole workshop is for you. So just be sure to take notes and, we'll have a Q&A session towards the end where you could unmute and ask away. Moderating the event is going to be Sean McCaffrey. He is a veteran too, as well, National Guard, right? You were in Kuwait, I believe, right? So kudos to you, big
Close
guy here.
enough. Close enough.
Yeah, okay, good. So he'll be moderating the event. We're so appreciative of always him always giving his time to this. So thank you so much, Sean. And I'm gonna hand it over to him and he's gonna, kick it off with a brief overview of who we are, and then we'll go on with the event. Thanks.
Thanks, Ramona. As Ramona said, I'm Sean McCaffrey. I'm a risk manager here at Virtu. Served on active duty for about 5.5 years as Army infantry officer. Had a deployment to a long deployment to Iraq that got extended almost 16 months, and then I was in the Guard for another five, and then decided to get a little fat, grow out my hair, and here I am today. So. Just a brief overview in terms of Virtu, how I look at it. We're really a financial services company, financial, very tech heavy in terms of technology. A lot of people in terms of their notion of trading firms, they think old school movies, et cetera. Really, like we're really based on our technology and how we're tethered to the markets. And really how I always look at it is we have kind of three business lines here where people are very familiar with buying and selling equities, stocks, right? You're trying to hopefully buy lower and sell higher. We have a prop business, prop traders that do that. So they're trying to trade everything from commodities to equities, and they're running a ton of strategies and trying to make money in those. So we have a traditional prop side, which you probably have met people that trade. It's fairly simple at its core, right? There's a lot of development in terms of the code and how people leverage ideas and strategies in terms of looking for those opportunities where they can make money. But at the end of the day, they're trying to make hopefully, a large amount over a lot of potentially small trades that it all adds up. Then separately, we're kind of a market maker. So if any of you are kind of trading on your Schwab or your Robinhood account, those trades actually may come through us, and we'll either route it out somewhere and they can be executed on exchange, or we may internalize it and then trade it at a later date and can make money that way. And then the third kind of business is execution services. So a lot of people have a 401k. Whoever has your 401k, they may be rebalancing. S&P 500's rebalancing in a couple of weeks, right? So they may have to trade out of a few symbols, and then buy a few symbols to kind of balance that. In that case, like that T Rowe Price or Fidelity or whatever it may be that have like a larger fund consisting of those symbols would use our proprietary algorithms to actually, for a variety of strategies, try to buy and sell those symbols. So it's really three businesses in one. But at its core, we work with a ton of people that are way smarter than me in terms of developers that are also they're looking at different ways to obviously optimize the trading, give our clients, in terms of our client business, the best possible execution. Like every fractional cent matters in terms of executions. But that's kind of how, very simplistically, Virtu, it's like it's obviously financial services, but it's really more fintech technologies at the core. And we really just have those kind of three separate business lines. So we do have a client business, but then we're also trading on our own. And we can answer we got a variety of people, and a lot of them are much smarter than me that can really probably go more granular if you have specific questions. But that's kind of the basic overview of Virtu at its heart, trying to simplify it because it can get complicated, but at the end of the day, everyone in the financial market is trying to make at least a little money on a trade. Or over the long course of a variety of trades, you're hopefully in aggregate going to try to be somewhere in the positive realm, right? Um, in terms of our panel, I'll just kind of go around the horn and let them introduce themselves. We're a pretty diversified geographically dispersed firm in a lot of different offices. So, I know a few panelists like Hartwig. I've never actually met you, so I figured I'd maybe start with you and let you actually just give maybe a brief overview of yourself, what you do at Virtu, and then good to meet you as well. So,
Yeah, yeah, nice to meet you as well, Sean. Yeah, so my name is Hartwig. I've been with Virtue roughly 3.5 years now. Did my PhD in pure math, and then joined our European office initially for 2 years in Dublin, moved over to the US at the end of 2024, and basically been working on our predictive models for our quantitative strategies. So the second business that Sean was mentioning. I don't hear you, Sean, if you're mentioning anything.
I went up. Rhea, I was gonna see if you want to
I
do a
sensed
brief
it.
intro as well.
I
So,
sensed it, so I unmuted myself.
sorry.
Hi, everyone. No worries. No, not at all. Hi, everyone. I'm Rhea White. I manage recruitment and retention and HR at Virtu. I've been here for almost 10 years. I'm a couple months shy of my 10-year mark here. I'm actually based in the Austin office, and I think I was the first recruiter hired here. So I feel like I'm happy to give advice. Michelle on my team in recruitment is happy to give advice. We've been doing this for a while. So Michelle, I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Thanks, Rhea. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle, and I've been with Virtu for about 4 years. I'm on the recruiting team, as Rhea said, and specifically, I focus on a lot of technical recruiting, so software engineers, and a lot of those roles for internship and full time. Yeah, and I'm really excited to be here today. I think that we definitely really respect that you're taking the time to be here and that you've served our country and actually, in our New York office here, we do have dedications in each of our conference rooms to military. So yeah, we're really connected, and yeah, just appreciate the partnership that we have. I'll pass it over to Kira.
I'm not on the panel, but Rachel, maybe do you want to take it?
Um, Hi, I'm Rachel Princiato. I'm in our Short Hills, New Jersey office. I have been at Virtu for a little bit over 20 years. I started when I was in middle school, um, but that was a joke. I have been managing a global team for a little over 10 or 11 years. So I've definitely interviewed a bunch of candidates through the years, and I've also worked with Rhea in prior years on some of our internship programs and internship programs and meeting some of our newer candidates as well. And as far as like what I do on the business side, I work with mostly on our client business and help coordinate with our clients on pretty much any of their technical asks when it comes to, setting up their connectivity so they are able to trade with us or if they need any enhancements. So a lot of touch points with both clients and with a lot of different teams at the firm.
Awesome. Um, I think I will just get into questions and ask the panelists, and then if anyone has a question along the way in terms of piggyback, just kind of, I think we can use probably the hand function, and then let you ask away. I think we can make this more free flowing. But Rhea, I guess I'll start with you because I think you've probably had a lot of resumes come across your desk, thousands and thousands. Um, can you talk about just basic in terms of like successful resume format, in terms of length, how people should format? Like, I'm sure you probably have a list of 50 things of do's and don'ts, but just at a high level in terms of like, what's a successful resume that you see come across, and what are like really things that stand out in terms of like where it goes into the fail pile in terms of even
Mm.
getting through recruiting initially?
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so I think the biggest thing that I would say for advice here is that quality is so much more important than quantity. As a recruiter, when you're reviewing resume after resume, if you sense that a resume is what we sometimes will say is like fluffy, just kind of has lines that don't really tie back to something meaningful or are potentially a repeat some of a similar bullet point on a resume, it just kind of adds some length that's unnecessary. And so as recruiters, we really like to see impactful resumes that have, unique bullet points of the work that someone has performed somewhere. I do think that, I get the question a lot around, is it a one-page resume? Is it a multiple page resume? I think for people that are earlier on in their careers, a one-page resume is generally expected. Uh, I personally like one-page resumes for everyone. Uh, I think it is okay to have a two-page resume if you're later on in your career. It's a little bit hard when you have, 20 years of experience or more doing something to like succinctly put that into one page, and then you feel like you have to concede and like not have things on your resume. So I think in that scenario, a two-page resume is fine. I love resumes that are very organized. I think there is personally something to be said for basic things like bullet points and bolding headers. Remember that the person looking at the resume is looking at potentially hundreds of resumes in a day. So that basic level of organization is really important for those on the other side. Yeah, I hope that helps. I'll stop there. And if there's anyone else, Michelle, if you wanted to jump in on that, be happy to pass it over.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it, Rhea. Something I was just thinking about was when I was, in school even, right, and like putting together resumes, I remember worrying about the formatting so much, right? And I think now that I'm on the other side and I'm doing the resume reviewing, it's kind of like silly. But you really just want to keep it simple, right? Like you don't need to make it like any crazy formats. You want it to be easy to read, unless maybe you're applying for a like design kind of role, right? I don't think you need to worry too much about it. You want it to be something that they can, a recruiter can quickly find, what are you working on right now? What are your skills? And what are you trying to do, right? If you're trying to get into something that you aren't already involved with, right? How are you kind of like showing that you are making your way towards there? And we can maybe talk about that later on as well if you guys have more questions. But yeah, my initial thoughts.
Michelle or Ray, can you kind of, because obviously with the emergence of AI, and
Mhm.
obviously applying tons of people job searching, even getting past the screening in terms of like recommendations, keywords, how, I know a lot of HR departments are kind of layering in AI even before you get to a human to kind of get past the first step, as potential applicants apply. There any kind of best practices for that to kind of stand out, at least get through the first AI screener gate, or what other, maybe another corporation is using it. I'm not even sure if we are. But I don't know if
Yeah.
you've had any experience with that and can kind of discuss that a bit.
Yes, AI is everywhere right now with regards to job applicants, resumes, tests that people complete. I would say that what we've seen is very common. A common practice with candidates is that they are mirroring the job duties on their resume. And that's actually okay to do, assuming that all of the job duties that are shown on the job are things that you have done or can speak to. But you just want to be careful not to completely match your resume to the bullet points that are part of the job description. So anything, of course, you put on your resume, be ready to back it up. Um, I will say also, you know, I think just from a keyword search point of view, sometimes if you are mentioning an acronym multiple times in a resume, it's good to spell out that acronym at least once. So the words are in the resume and that gets, picked up if the employer happens to be using an AI scanner for the resumes. Um, yeah, we're still really early on to some extent with AI and resumes, but certainly we do see when candidates will just slip a word in a very random spot that's a word that's reflective of the job description, but actually when you read their resume, they don't have the experience for the role. So again, just making sure the resume is honest to what your skill sets are, I think is best practice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rachel, I figured because I know you've been a hiring manager, have several new team members over the last few years. Can you kind of just, in terms of once it gets past HR, what in terms of resumes have maybe stood out to you as you've been hiring new team members, what you were looking for, how people kind of get to the top of the batch, and is it greenhouses or system we use, I think? Right? In terms of rankings, I'm sure you kind of have a certain way of doing it, but maybe just from someone that's actually been hiring and hired new folks recently, what really stood out?
I think, similar to what Ray and Michelle were saying, like a resume that's easy to read, like I want to be able to understand what you were doing, what your prior role entailed. So if you get too specific about certain things that a different company had, that might be very specific to that company, I'm not going to know what that means. So make sure that it's someone that doesn't know exactly what that role entailed, understands the general, what you contributed or what you were responsible in that role. So, and that it's not, using words or teams that are, internal names. I would say that that's important. And this is a little bit more to the interviewing, but make sure that you can speak to every single thing that's on that resume, and that the skill level you're putting for certain things. If you write conversational Spanish and you can't answer, be able to really do that. I would rather you say you don't have that related experience than embellish it. And there's been countless times where I've asked a pretty straightforward question about something that's on the resume, and it was very minimal experience or something that was more of like a buzzword that was mentioned. They're like, oh, well, I worked with a team that did that instead of having the direct experience. So it's tied into the interviewing, but I think making sure that somebody can read it and really get a strong takeaway of what you were, or a basic, not strong maybe, but a basic understanding of what you were doing in that role without it being super specific to that firm. And, just making sure it's honest. It sounds silly, but, you know, there's many times where people have not been able to explain a bullet point on their resume. So making sure that you can speak to um, in various levels of detail anything that's on there.
Harway, do you have anything to add in terms of either interviewing or being kind of in and around it, in terms of best practices that you've seen?
Yeah, so definitely I would agree with the last point that Michelle made. So being able to back up what you put on your CV. So I had a couple of times that people literally list a laundry list of 10 coding languages or so. And especially early on in the career, it's kind of hard to believe that they are proficient in every single one of them. So, and as soon as you start probing there a little bit, then you see, hey, they had maybe 5 years ago one course in college that they did there. And then I would just recommend maybe just leave it off because otherwise it leaves this impression that can I really trust what you put on your CV?
Appreciate it. Thank you. Um, Ray or Michelle, I know, obviously people have extenuating service, especially military veterans, right? You have family dynamics that change. You're moving all over. Some people may want to folks focus on their family for, 2 or 3 years and then re-enter the workforce. Do you have any recommendations in terms of maybe an applicant that has had some sort of gap along the way, and then maybe how to address that directly in the resume or wait till an interview, or maybe any sorts of thoughts on how to kind of go about that because it's obviously a unique situation. I think a lot of times it's explainable, but it's kind of the maybe the best course of action to take if
Mhm.
anyone has a situation like that.
Yeah, I can take that, and Michelle, jump in if you want to as well. I think that, I think that sometimes people take time off or have gaps in their career for, obvious reasons. You take time off to raise, a family. You take time off to serve your country. You take time off to deal, handle a family matter. And, some of those things I think are okay to lean into. I think that there's sort of this like stigma that you have to like conceal the gaps in your resume because like recruiters are looking at the years and like, oh my gosh, there's like a year and a half where this person's not working. I think it's okay to lean into those, especially if it's stuff is something that you've done that you're proud of, or personal to you. Maybe it's something that you did to help a family member and you had to take a year and a half off, right? Like those things are okay. It makes you human, and I think that it's important to just be very open and transparent about it. I've seen on people's LinkedIn profiles, like mothers who have taken time off to raise a family and will have it like as a job in LinkedIn, like mommying or something silly, right? And it's like, oh, that's yeah, of course it's a full-time job. You should take the time off and be with your kids before you go back into the workforce. So um, I think from a resume standpoint, from a whatever social profile standpoint, like it's okay to be, transparent in some circumstances. Maybe not in all, but in some circumstances, I think that's all right. And I also think that in interviews, being very open and speaking to those things, confidently and transparently is definitely important too. For the most part, that's what the traits of the hire that's those are the traits that any company would want in a future hire. So I think it's okay to be honest about it. Oh, Sean, I think you're muted.
I try to keep doing it. I keep forgetting. Sorry. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that? I think Rhea kind of hit it on the head, but figure you may.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think maybe this is also where a cover letter could be useful, right? If you're not including it
Mm,
in a line on your
yeah.
resume, because I would say, in general, if a cover letter is not required, I wouldn't necessarily like, submit it if it's just a summary of what you've worked on. But if it explains something that's not on your resume, I do think that's useful. If I look at a resume and I see a gap, I might think, oh, I wonder what they were doing during that time and look around for something that will tell me maybe, they took a class or they were working on a project or, and yeah, a cover letter might be where I look to kind of like explain some of that. So that's another place if you didn't want to put in the resume specifically.
Yeah, I just want to add to that too. I think showing an employer uh, that you've been sharpening skills while taking time off of work is also a really great way too to kind of land that, oh, I took time off to deal with this family matter, but during that time I learned how to, code SQL, and I understand databases now to prepare me for my next job. Like I think that really shows a lot of energy and dedication to one's career. So it could be a good way to sort of balance out that message.
Great. Thank you. I figure we'll kind of move on, maybe focus a little bit on interviewing best practices in a little more detail. Rachel, can you kind of just, as a frequent hiring manager, kind of go into, what you're looking for in interviews, how candidates have stood out, and kind of just general best practices that you look for from when you're meeting with a candidate?
Sure. So, I don't know if this is totally on point, but sometimes I say that interviewing is kind of like dating. You want there to be mutual interest, and
It's good.
and you know, we want this to be a mutual connection, right? And I think personally for me, as an interviewer, I'm never looking to come from a place of like interrogation. I want it to be very conversational, and I want the person to feel comfortable and confident. And because I think that also kind of portrays kind of the firm culture, how the interviews go. And obviously you have to ask questions and be specific and expect you have high expectations, but that doesn't necessarily need to be an intimidating way. That's just my standpoint. And uh, I want the person to feel to be themselves, right? And to not be nervous. And I think someone who comes in confident and shows the mutual interest is, that's key. You know, Having a really good reason why, you want to be at our firm specifically, showing that, you know what our firm is about and it's not just our blurb on the website. I had someone that knew like the history of Virtu from like the whole company timeline, which I was so impressed with that they remembered all of this. I like learned information about our company on this interview. So I think, yeah, I was like, wow, that happened in, whatever year it
What
was.
year was that, Rachel? When was that?
It was, I forget who it was. I don't think it was someone I actually hired, but
Oh, okay.
I was really appreciative that they took so much time to really learn about our firm's like, you
Yeah.
know, present and past and how we kind of came to be. And it wasn't just like spewing, the first blurb that they had. And sometimes people aren't 100%, that's why you're interviewing, you're learning about the company. But I think when people take the time to, know about the firm, and a reason why you want the role that's not, for more money. I've had people say I want to make more money. I'm like, well, if that's your motivation,
Hmm.
I get that. Everybody, needs to make money. That's why we don't work for free. But there should be something else behind it. So if, I would not give that as the main reason why you want to work at this firm or have that specific role. Uh, but I would say, confidence and mutual interest. You know if somebody doesn't, I always, say at the end of the interview, do you have questions? I want it to be an open conversation where it's not just like me firing questions. And I also want the candidate to show the interest in, our organization. When we're kind of concluding the interview and I say, do you have any questions for me? And they say no, I automatically don't want to hire that person because you don't want to know what a day is like. You don't want to know what our company culture is like how, like what's your real interest in this role? And if you're not asking questions about how your daily, you spend more time working than pretty much anything else you're doing. So if you don't care how your day is like or what the team is like, uh, what do people do, how the office is, anything like that, I'm personally probably just not moving on from that. So I think, it should be a mutual agreement and feeling, and expressing interest goes both ways, and just learning as much as you can about the role. Obviously, you have certain, you know, there's a certain amount of time that you have, and it's okay to, maybe ask for more time or ask for a follow-up, I would say, if you don't feel like you got that full idea of it. So, and when it comes to the questions, I think, um, just make sure you're not rambling. Like it's really hard to, someone's silent and they're listening, but making sure you're concise and you get your point across, and you're not, going off on tangents or explaining something in such detail that it's totally beyond, what I'm going to know that you're doing in your current role at your current firm, because it's way too specific. So, those are some of my main takeaways. And obviously, we're a very casual firm, but I, like to see that somebody is, presenting themselves in a very professional and, you know, success, looking for success, kind of dressed for success, when it comes to the interview. And, you know, their microphone works and there's no one running around in the background, and, they're very focused on the interview and don't have anything else going on. Um, but I would say those are probably the main things. I'm sure I will think of some other some other items, but and the other thing is, I like to see a little personality come through. So if, I always ask for, a fun fact or a hobby or something that's not on your resume. And, every firm is different. I think we have a very interactive firm where company culture is so important. Like, I will say that, you know probably 9 out of 10 resumes that, get past the initial screen from Rhea and her team, to me, they may fit the right skill set, but then there's the personality is just not the right fit. So I think it's very important that your personality and your work style and how you work with people comes across as you interview. And, your personality, or I like a fun fact or a hobby, just to see that, you're a person outside of the role, whatever it may be. It could be something really, really silly, or, your favorite book, or your favorite place that you traveled, or something that just shows the person beyond, just the resume.
Thanks, Rachel. I probably should have stopped it before we started kind of moving to interviews, but it's one to kind of open it
Oh,
up
did I
because
say it?
no, because I wasn't following the agenda and doing a bad job moderating. But I just kind of wanted to open it up in terms of, before we move too far away from the kind of resumes and just general resume building. Does anyone have any questions in the audience in terms of specific things that maybe you would like one of us to address, or we could kind of give you an opinion or two on? We can hold them to the end too. I figured I just kind of give an opportunity now. All right. Nothing. Okay. Um, Hartwick, I'll go to you. Do you want to kind of just getting back in terms of interviewing, kind of best practices that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. So, best practices, I mean, just from a getting the easy points out of the way first. So, there are quite a lot of things that an interview can go wrong, but getting the basics right is so easy, and sometimes I'm surprised that some candidates don't necessarily care that much about it. So some basic stuff like getting a proper microphone, making sure your internet connection is stable, all these kind of things that just make it very easy for to derail the interview basically. And then it wasn't even about your skills, wasn't about your background, anything. So getting this right is, I think, easy enough. From then on, is there anything more specific that you would like me to elaborate on?
I mean, if you want to think about maybe it probably, in terms of best interviews you've been through, kind of like best practices that you've seen candidates kind of come to, and how well they were prepared, and
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So maybe just a little bit of background. So usually when we hire, it's a lot of PhDs, PhD candidates, postdocs. So a lot of people with some kind of research background. And so they spend something like 5 years doing their PhD, sometimes a postdoc on top. So usually for a very long time, they were very enchanted in love with their research subject. And so they can talk for hours about it. But if we're in an interview, I would just like to get some kind of brief overview initially. And usually I'm not an expert, so I did my PhD in pure math, but we get candidates in from computer science, physics, statistics, everything. So usually I'm not contexted in their specific subject. So I just want a 2 or 3 sentence summary, and I think you can translate this over to other areas as well, right? So something you did in college, some kind of project or so. It doesn't need to be about a PhD. But having something ready there, basically some kind of pitch, it doesn't need to be rehearsed, but you need to have thought about it, how to advertise it to a non-expert audience. And I think this is really helpful. Just in the basic way, how would you explain to family members who never went to college what you did in your PhD? And usually you would have had these conversations at some point anyway. And being able to convey this in an interview is, I think, a very good skill because it's also about eventually you would end up working in our group, so collaborating with us, and then it's about, hey, can you actually uh, get your point across concisely, easily understandable in some way. So it's for us also a way to gauge how it would be like working with you if you would be someone who would just go on a 10-minute uh, uh, um, uh, I was about to say rant, but maybe I'm missing the right word for it, about some specific subject, or if you can actually just get to the point and then we can move on from there. So it's also a lot about, beside these technical skills, just about how you can uh, uh, work with these technical skills in a human to human way.
Great. Thank you. I'd just like to add to that because I recently hired, just to kind of piggyback on Rachel. I think, first and foremost, like a lot of candidates, you can tell do a really good job of preparing themselves, especially in terms of their intro and overview. Like I would say 80 to 90% of interviewers are going to want you to kind of walk through the resume. And then some candidates are really prepared and some aren't. Like that's kind of like a layup home run where I hate to say it, but that's something like you can spend 10, 15 minutes a night in front of the mirror gaining confidence in terms of talking about yourself. And I always tell candidates like it's the time, there's a balance between being overconfident, right? And then too humble. You kind of want to find that happy medium because in an interview is your time to kind of shine. So I see sometimes where candidates don't really want to brag. And obviously you don't want to be too too confident and come off too arrogant, but it is the time to kind of, you know, show the interviewer that, you're special and why you should get the role. So you should be prepared to kind of talk about yourself and how exceptional you are or certain areas that you're exceptional in and be ready to highlight them and kind of have your talking points ready. And it's really hit or miss in terms of candidates I've talked to. I think Rachel hit on appearance. I've had everything from people, you know, dress really well. Like my personal opinion is you can't never be overdressed at least to make your first impression, right? So the worst candidate I interviewed a few months ago, was in a t-shirt that looked stained, looked like he hadn't, I am not joking, definitely didn't shower that morning, but I think hadn't showered in about a week. Wasn't making eye contact. It looked like he had another screen he was watching in his peripheral vision. So I felt like he wasn't even connecting with me human to human. And then also I would recommend it just distracted me as an interviewer. His entire background was full of like collectibles, I guess, like comic book characters, and it was like very distracting. So he wasn't making eye contact with me. Then my eyes are tuning to his whole background. That's like futuristic collection of things, like background generic, so you can make eye contact, and then have like a genuine conversation is the most important thing, because like especially me as an interviewer, I'm trying to connect with you in terms of if I think you're going to be a good team member and teammate. Like as Rachel said, you're spending more time with people at work than you are with your own family half the time. So ideally, there's going to be friction in work. You're going to have battles, but ideally, hopefully you like each other 80% of the time. Right. So like I think it's very important to establish those right away. Like generic background, be ready to have like a real open and honest conversation. And then be prepared with your talking points and what you want to highlight. Don't be surprised by anything. You should almost, in my opinion, lots of times you can kind of dictate the conversation a bit and steer it in the right way to highlight things. And no job is going to be exactly the same, but you might have kind of corresponding, something that's slightly applicable to that like problem that the hiring manager is trying to solve or friction that he or she has. So like have those rehearsed in your head. Is the most important thing. And I've seen candidates that were really good at that, and then some that were completely unprepared. But the biggest thing, like Hartwick said too, like eliminate those distractions. Do your, in the military, we do comms checks, right? It's like very important before you roll out of the wire. You're going to make sure all your radios are working, everything's new batteries, all of that. It's the same way in a job, right? If your Zoom's not connecting, you can't hear, you have a Bluetooth headphones that aren't connecting to your laptop that you're interviewing, it leaves a bad impression. So like try to eliminate all those distractions, be generic, and then give your best foot forward. You want to be dressed nice, comb your hair, make sure like those things do matter to people. Like, even at Virtu, we're very, I mean, I don't really think, right, right, we don't have a dress code as far as I know. Kind of. I mean, we can't roll in and terrible, but like we're
Y-
very informal, but for
Yes.
first impression, be formal. No
Yes.
matter where you are, in my opinion. So
Totally agree. First impressions do really matter. And I don't think you could be overdressed for an interview. I mean, it's funny because, as Sean said, we're a pretty casual firm, and I'm in the Austin office. And like when I put a blazer on to come to work, I feel I'm by far the most dressed up person in the office. The majority of people here have on t-shirts. They're not stained, but they do have on t-shirts. And that's fine once you're here, you get a vibe of the culture. You know it's casual, okay, but when it's an interview, when you're making your first impression, it really does mean a lot to put your best foot forward. So totally agree with you on that.
Um, I would also just say if there's an opportunity for the interview to be in person, like always take an in-person interview versus a virtual one. Obviously,
Yeah.
everything, situational, especially this day and age, but um, anytime you can, you know, if there's an opportunity to do that, don't shy away from that. I would say to make the extra effort if you can or offer that in part of the process.
Michelle, do you have anything to add in terms of initial interviews you've done with candidates, best practices, worst practices, kind of?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying before, Sean, about like engaging, right, with the interviewer. And I, I think it's a hard balance, right? Because you're coming in, you want to be like super prepared, and you should have some questions prepared. But I think also coming up with some questions like during the conversation is really good, right? I think when a candidate is asking me about things that I've brought up before, then I feel like, they're listening and actually, want to be there, and they're asking about specific things relating to Virtu, not just general questions that they're asking every company, right? So yeah, so like, if I say, hey, this is a little bit about Virtu and this is our business and this is what they do, maybe they can say, oh, well, I don't know much about that. Like, could you tell me more about that? Or, what does that mean? What does that look like? Yeah, just like kind of small things like that. I think it's good to show them that you're engaged. And I think earlier it was also mentioned that like looking things up on the website, or even social media these days, right? I mean, we're trying to post more on LinkedIn and Instagram and other websites so that hopefully prospective candidates can get a sense of what we're like outside of our job descriptions and the more formal stuff, right? So I love it when a candidate will say, "Oh, saw your post about this, and that you're really involved in community service or these events, and I would really like to be a part of that." I think that's really cool, and yeah, again, just kind of speaks to your specific interest, right? And you don't have to have spent like 5 hours researching the company. Just like one or two specific things really makes a difference.
Thank you. Um, I'll open it up again. Any questions along the way in terms of just interview best practices, worst practices? Um, no, and then we're just going to kind of transition it into kind of just because I think all of you, obviously, I've been there getting out of the military. You're gonna, no matter what, transition to some sort of completely new industry. Right. So I kind of want to Rhea and Michelle, if you kind of want to take it to start off, I know we've had some unique candidates that were in different industries have gotten hired here. Can you kind of just talk in terms of like your initial when you're screening them, like how those candidates best kind of pitch themselves in terms of, hey, I was doing X, now I want to come to Virtu and do Y. Because I think that's a common, obviously getting out of the military, you're transitioning, and I mean I know when I was, you're personally you're scared, right? You don't know what industries entail, how to pitch your skill set in terms of what you were doing in the military to kind of a new role in a new industry. So I don't know if you can maybe think about any candidates that you come across along the way that kind of switched industries into ours and kind of how they succeeded.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I think that well, culture fit is it probably plays a very important part of this, right? I think it's important to understand the company. It's important to understand like what cultural values the company sort of has and sort of lives by, and if that's a fit for you, really, you know, trying to have that sort of show through in your interview. I think that's important. um, in some cases, they, you might not have, exactly the skills if you're transitioning to an entirely new industry. You may not have the exact skills for the role. So I think showing sort of the characteristics that are positive that you have that can apply anywhere, right? Like, being extremely hardworking, being very, honest, having strong character, being humble is very important, at least from Virtue's point of view. I think as much as you can have those personality traits that are positive for any company show through in an interview, that's very important. The other thing I would say with regards to transitioning, is, again, highlighting the skills that maybe you have been working on to get to that particular point, right? Like if you are really interested in a slightly more technical role than what your past experience reflects, if there's a course that you can take, there's tons of different websites out there, Coursera, LeetCode that you can go to. You can, take a class here or there. And you should put those things on your resume to really signal that you're taking the transition very seriously. Um, any other sort of certifications that you can get, or any ways that you can show that you're really like, widening your knowledge set of a particular industry or of a particular job, and really leaning into that in your resume is critically important. Yeah. Anything else? I'm not Michelle, did you have anything to add there, or have had experiences with those types of candidates coming
I was
in?
gonna say that I think networking is also your friend here. If you don't have the experience, maybe there will be other people out there that can either give advice or maybe even find a connection for you and share about roles that might be open. I think, before getting into recruiting, I mean, I didn't have specific experience in recruiting. I think I was looking into I don't know, like marketing and some other roles. Not completely unrelated, but it's a little bit different. And so I had reached out to a lot of alumni from my college on LinkedIn. I just did a search, right? And I looked up different roles and alumni, and they're more likely to reach out. So kind of like finding people that might be in similar groups or like have some similar backgrounds as you, have like maybe gone through it before. They may not find you your job necessarily, but they can at least give you more perspective into the different kind of roles and see if that's something that you do want to pursue. Because maybe you don't even know what that role entails, right? And so, yeah, I'd recommend like reaching out to people that you maybe like have some overlap with in some way. And maybe they'll say, hey, you should look into this course, right? Or maybe this is what I did, and I think this is really important for the role. So yeah, that might be something to look into.
Um, I just want to also add, I had a candidate that had related but not direct experience, but we were very interested in her from a personality and culture fit and thought that she had the right background to be able to train up. And she actually really asked me a lot of questions about her training program and how she would get up to speed and, how much support she was going to get or if she was just kind of going to get like thrown in. So I think also, from your perspective, if you are going into a role that doesn't have you don't have direct experience, making sure that, they have a plan in place or how you're going to be supported to get to where you need to be as well, so that they're prepared to help you get there and support you as well, could be a good question to ask in the interview process as it goes on, if it gets you know closer to an offer, or even if you get an offer, it's okay to come back with questions along those lines as to how you know you're going to be measured in your success to get to where they expect you to be.
Thanks, Rachel. And just in terms of just one thing, personally, like I would say, especially as you're transitioning on the military, looking for a new industry, just it's you're always just going to have to lots of times your skill set in the military is not always going to like directly apply to that, but think about situations that you've done and really do your research in terms of that industry in general and things that you've done in the military. There's always going to be certain skill sets and certain things you've done that will apply in some way. It's just harder. So like I think as Michelle said, like networking, like always find like veterans. There's veterans doing all sorts of things all over in all sorts of industries, and they're going to help kind of massage like what you've done in terms of that industry, and then kind of be able to help transition like that military role, that military speak, that military description into kind of like those skills or bullet points in that specific industry. Because lots of times people don't necessarily like, especially if your resume or how you're speaking is too military, it's and the verbiage isn't formed in the right way, it's going to be harder. But lots of times those veterans are like, no, what you did here, you say X, you should kind of say like XA, and they'll be able to kind of translate for you. And the more conversations you have like that with fellow veterans kind of now in the industry that you're kind of looking or honing in on in terms of employment, like the more conversations you have that will build and you'll just get more knowledgeable in general and then be able to speak about yourself and kind of tailor your resume kind of more industry specific with kind of like the accomplishments and the work that you've already done. So as Michelle said, like the network's everything. Like, normally people are usually willing to take a few minutes to have a conversation, especially if you have some sort of common ground, whether it's a same alumni from the same folks, or you were both a certain role in the military, or we were both Army or both Air Force. Like people are usually willing to have a conversation. So don't be afraid to ask because it kind of all builds on each other. Um, so. Hartwick, you have anything to add? I haven't kind of circled back to you.
Yeah, actually, I think just maybe if I had one thing to add, it's also just that everything takes practice. And so interviewing also takes practice. So be forgiving to yourself that maybe the first few interviews or so maybe won't go as well, as long as you basically keep track of what didn't go well and improve on that. So Virtue wasn't the only company that I applied to. There were other companies that I also applied to. Interviews didn't go that well there. Maybe sometimes here they did well, in other firms they also did well. I went well. So it's always some kind of learning experience, and yeah, as long as you keep on improving on that, I think it's fine to mess up the first few interviews.
Great. Thank you. Um, Anybody have anything else to add? I think we could probably open it up for a Q&A. We're an open book, so don't be afraid to ask questions. Anything if you're interested in Virtu in general, like we can give you a more granular kind of overview of our business. If you have any specific questions, for myself or any of the panelists, more than willing to spend a few minutes answering those.
You know,
Sean,
I,
I'll
I
ask. Oh,
I'm sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry. I just wanted to ask one thing that I have heard of before, and I saw that maybe we didn't touch on. What about salary? How do you feel about people talking about money in an interview? Because I know that could be kind of like a gray area depending on where you go.
I'll take that. I mean, I think that it is a little bit, it's a little bit, I would say like a little bit off-putting for that to happen early in the process. So, if asked, of course, sure, I think giving the details around like what your expected salary range is like appropriate early on in the process. But usually for us, it doesn't come into play until like the final stages. Um, and I think just being honest with what you're looking for and, giving a range, thinking about it too, it's important to be prepared for that. Like when you're going into that conversation on the other side, of course, I'm always on the employer side, but, thinking about what is the number that I would be, okay with? What is the number that I'm going to be really, really excited with? And kind of knowing where those ranges are set for yourself prior to the conversation is kind of good, a good way to prepare yourself for the numbers that you might be about to hear in that sort of salary conversation. Um, you can also always say, no matter what I like to hear from candidates, even if they decide not to accept our offer, is to always be very gracious, right? Thank you so much for the offer. I think it's a fair offer. I'd like to take it away and talk about and think about it and talk to my family about it for a bit. We hear that a lot, and I think that's completely a respectable answer. So don't feel the pressure that you need to deliver feedback in the moment that you hear the numbers. Does that answer your question, Ramona? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, one piece of advice that I did terribly when I was transitioning to, also when you're negotiating your salary, especially right out of the military, make sure you calculate your other benefits in the military too, because lots of times like your TRICARE is like dirt cheap in terms of your insurance, and you have like your housing allowances and tax, etc. So just make sure you do your research on that so you're not like all of a sudden saying I accept and then you realize you've actually taken a massive pay cut when you're looking at like your take home pay. It's the best way to look at it. There's a lot of considerations in that. I think there's a lot of, websites and stuff to guide you, but I think there are veterans probably like I didn't do a perfect job of calculating that don't necessarily take that just in terms of your taxable income and other benefits that you have that aren't necessarily like show exactly on your W-2 you get from I don't know what is it, DFAS or something, I think's the pay. I get my mind is so just think about that too. Because not only your pay, but your benefits in terms of your insurance, especially have your family, etc., are all things that are should be highly considered. And it's a little more kind of a socialized kind of system in the military in general. So
Sean, on that, there are a lot of benefits from the military. I guess my question would be, whoever would like to take it, is when should someone who's transitioning in the interview process ask about benefits, especially detailed information about packages?
Ray or Michelle, you want to maybe take that one?
I think it's okay to ask those questions earlier on than maybe compensation. Uh, Also, many companies might bring this up in the initial interview, um, at least a high level overview of like, this is what we offer. Uh, I would say on the whole, for us, again, these things don't come up until the end of the interview process. But if benefits and, some specific, components of like coverage is important, I think it's okay to like bring up a high level question early on. I mean, you don't want to get all the way to the end of the interview process and not know whether or not a company covers something that might be important to you. But I would say, generally speaking, also with the comp conversation happens at the end of the process.
Thank you. I think
Sure.
one more question. Appropriate follow-up. Can you share with them once they apply, if they haven't heard back, when should they follow up after they had an interview? When should they follow up and things like that?
Well, I'll let Michelle take some of this, but the one thing I will say is I think it's so nice to receive a thank you after especially an on-site interview when you meet a team in person. I think that's kind of a basic thing that most people know to do, but it doesn't always happen, and I will just say from an employer's standpoint, we care to see the human touch, in anyone that we hire. So it's great to get a thank you, for your time. Really enjoyed speaking to you all, mentioning people's names. You don't have to go into elaborate detail, but a heartfelt thank you, I think, is really important after an interview. Um, Follow up. Michelle, what do you think? What's the typical follow up look like for you with candidates these days?
Yeah, I think if you're already in the process, like you've received communication, that you're moving forward, you're setting up an interview or you talk to somebody, I think like within 3 days is probably fair, right? If you haven't heard back in a couple of days, like, hey, just checking in, super interested. If you've applied to a company and you haven't heard back in general, this is tricky because I mean, there's no guarantee that you will necessarily hear back, and that may not be because like it might not be because of your like qualifications, right? It could just be timing. I mean, as Rhea mentioned earlier, we get a lot of applications, so sometimes it just depends on time of year when you apply. So don't be discouraged if you don't hear back. But I think, if you've applied, you haven't heard back in like 2 weeks and you want to check in, you can just be prepared to potentially not get a response. I will say one thing is like our team is pretty close and I'm sure like a lot of recruiting teams do overlap a lot. So just don't message every single person on the recruiting team because they will talk about that because you want to check in but you don't want to like spam, right? So yeah, I think if you find one or two people that is a recruiter, maybe potentially would be recruiting for the roles that you're working on, reach out to them, send them a like nice note that says something specific about the company and that might catch their attention. I do get a lot of LinkedIn messages that just say, hey, I just applied, super interested. And it just doesn't really tell me a lot, right? But if you come to me and you say, hey, I read about XYZ, like kind of what I was saying earlier of something, unique to the company, like, oh, I noticed you post about this, right? Like I'm really interested in that. That might catch my attention and I'll be more likely to respond or like at least flag it to somebody else on my team who's maybe managing that role, right? So yeah, maybe within a couple of weeks, but it, job searching is hard. So don't be discouraged.
Yeah, and just from a hiring manager perspective, like I think most of the time people appreciate, a quick note. I've seen they vary greatly where I can tell people are just have their standard boilerplate, they cut and paste. People that are more crafty, like the more you can personalize it in terms of when you were listening in that conversation and picked up, maybe strategic projects that are going to be forthcoming, this, that, the more personalized like you can make it in terms of the conversation you had in the interview, the better, right? You can kind of have maybe your standard boilerplate and then customize and send it to that hiring manager. But I've seen some pretty bad ones and then some really good ones where I was like, wow, okay, we had a great conversation. We discussed things. I could tell they were listening. I could tell they were thinking about maybe issues that we have to solve or things that we're going to address or where the business is moving. And that's probably the type of candidate you're going to really put towards the top of the heap when they can kind of really go over the top versus like thank you for taking your time, right? Like, customize it a bit, and that goes miles, in my opinion. Rachel, you maybe have anything to add there?
Um,
You've
I
seen
don't
a
I don't
lot.
know if Rhea or Michelle have opinions on this, but I think it's also, when you wrap up the interview, I've had people say like, what are the next steps? And, you know, I think at that point I could say, oh, you're the first person we interviewed, so, you'll hear from HR, at some point, but just letting you know, like, we're just starting this out or something. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask that, but I do get that fairly often. I will say on a personal level, my husband just got hired at an international bank, a very large company, and it took a very, I feel we get very spoiled here. We're a small firm and everyone kind of, things move very quickly here at times. And, you know, the larger the company, the longer things may take just because of certain processes and, red tape, et cetera, that, I think we get a little spoiled by not having some of that. So, you know, I think it took 3 months from when he was told he was getting an offer to get a formal offer. So, yeah, that was crazy. But, just the follow-ups and the scheduling of the interviews and some of it took kind of a long time, but it wound up with a positive result. So I think, um, you know, it just also may depend on the firm. And like Michelle said, like every situation's a little bit different. But that being said, if sometimes there could be a hot pursuit where things move quickly as well, depending on, the need or how things are going. But I do think, getting the personal note. Also, it doesn't take very long to shoot off like a personal email. It doesn't have to be a paragraph long, but just a personal one. Sometimes as hiring managers, we are spending many hours, speaking to candidates. So it's nice when they kind of acknowledge, even at the end of the interview, just saying like, thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions, and it was great talking to you. Just like a nice way to wrap up the interview. It is kind of just showing that. And it sounds very simple, but you'd be surprised when how many times you don't hear it.
Thanks, Rachel. I see Carolyn, I see your question in the chat, so I'm going to read that out, and then maybe Ray, you might be the best to answer this. What questions can you approach a recruiter or HR specialist with versus say for the panel? Say every interview in my industry is now a panel, sometimes multiple. Then a group hiring decision. Um, and it seems that there's bias barriers for female veterans occur. How can one break those perceptions down to create connections in a 45-minute interview?
Sorry. Yeah, we don't do a lot of panel interviews at Virtu. Our interviews are very much one person to one person for, I'd say, 95% of the time. Um, I think I think that part of the question is how, what questions, when you're in a one-on-one interview with a recruiter, it's very easy to say, like, you know, what do you, what's your experience been like at Virtu? Or what do you think of the culture? These are very um, one-on-one types of questions. And I can see how those questions maybe wouldn't land as well if you're talking to like a group of three people. So I think like for one, I think it's probably okay to be a bit reserved in how many questions you ask a panel. I think a panel interview, um, you know, it's going to be more, hopefully more like an open sort of flowing discussion if there are multiple people there. I think the questions, if you're going to ask a question in those interviews, I think probably, you know, I would focus a little bit on, how each of them view the role itself. Specific questions about the job might be good for a panel interview. Um, maybe questions about probably questions about the company would also work. So that's probably my feedback there. I don't have a ton of experience with this interview type, so that's probably what I would say. And then avoiding group hiring decisions and bias barriers. Yeah, we talk about this a lot at Virtu. It unfortunately, with any type of bias, there's always this fear that, we're not like that we're falling into some bias trap, right? Group think, or you heard that this one person thought that this candidate didn't perform great. You might go into that interview feeling like you've already sort of made your decision because your coworker doesn't like this person for whatever reason. Um, Here, we try to be very fair and we conceal interview feedback from one interview to the next so that people don't have a chance to read interview feedback before they go in. And we do have group discussions about candidates. So, you know, I don't know if I'm answering the question directly, but I would say that at Virtu, we do a good job, I think, of trying to avoid those biases.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'll open up any other questions.
Can I ask a question? Um,
Sure.
the Raya and Michelle, aside from resume, is there anything that you would recommend when it comes to LinkedIn or any like social media or just like online presence? Obviously I'm sure there's very clear do's and don'ts, but anything that you would add for anyone in those regards?
Yeah, I do think that it's good to have like a fairly active LinkedIn profile. You don't have to repost everything you see and make a comment on everything, right? But you know, it's it's essentially a job platform. That is why it is there. And if you are on LinkedIn, you know, you are reviewing various roles, you should follow companies that you're interested in. You should join groups that you're interested in. You should repost things that are, important to you. I do think that employers look at that stuff. We certainly do. I wouldn't say we put like a ton of importance into, well, what's this person doing on LinkedIn? But, we'll generally take a look at the LinkedIn profile if we need like a closer view of a candidate. So I think it's good to be moderately active on those platforms. Beyond LinkedIn, we don't really look for any other platforms. I mean, if we're like a little bit, if we're unsure about a candidate, we may go and check other platforms just to see if there's any funny business going on. So please make sure your social profiles are clean and above board. That's number one. Uh, but yeah, that's probably what I would say regarding LinkedIn. Anything to add there, Michelle?
Yeah, I was just thinking, on our side, we have LinkedIn Recruiter, so we can go into a different view than maybe most of you have day to day looking in LinkedIn. So, yeah, we can see and filter by candidates who are already following our company on LinkedIn. We can also look at the types of roles and locations that they're open to. You can actually like list that in your LinkedIn, which could be helpful, especially if, let's say, someone has a title and you're not really sure if they're interested in this kind of role, right? Maybe there's a mismatch in terms of like, yeah, the leveling or anything like that, but we might not know what that looks like in your current firm, right? And so that can indicate to us like, hey, actually, that is the type of role that you're looking for. Usually managerial, like individual contributor kind of roles are like where that could be useful. Um, and yeah, I think it's cool when I see someone who's like really passionate about like technology, right? Because I'm looking at software engineers and maybe they're posting their personal projects, right? And they can post it on LinkedIn. They put like their website on their resume. Sometimes YouTube, they'll be top teaching like programming concepts to other people on like YouTube. And that's kind of cool, right? It shows like you're taking initiative, you care about learning, you care about sharing information to hopefully, teach others. And that's the kind of like culture that we look for, right? We want someone that's gonna want to continue to grow and be open to sharing their growth with others. So yeah, I'd say those are some things that I'd recommend to, just tweak and post.
Thank you. Open it back up one more time. Any other alibi questions? I think we're almost at the time. Ramona, you have anything
No,
else?
I don't
Okay.
have anything.
Yeah. Um, Appreciate everyone
Hope
joining
to them.
today. Hopefully this was helpful. One thing I'll leave with you with, and it's something that stuck in my head. I think I may have said it like a year or two ago when we did this, but when I was transitioning out, it was financial crisis, so I wanted to work in Wall Street, right? Every banks were collapsing all over. I was hitting people up, can I have a coffee? Can I have conversations? Um, and the time wasn't right because basically firms were losing a third or merging with people, right? And I transitioned, got a kind of almost a temporary consulting job for a bit, and then knew I still wanted to do it. So just always realized just because like the window of opportunities there's always like macro events, et cetera, where like banks collapsing all over in '09, right? Where you may not land your perfect role right away, but as you go, you're just going to start learn, keep having those conversations, and they build on it themselves in terms of like what skill set you may want, what other conversations you may want to have to land like that ideal job or role, because the window may not always be open immediately, but it may be open in 6 months. So don't ever get discouraged. I have another peer in Virtu that had a very similar situation, right? Same timeline, nothing. The window just wasn't open at that time. And I specifically remember meeting somebody, can't remember his name, but it was for coffee, and he was a veteran, and he told me, just remember that people are going to respect you for your service, but they're not going to give you a job, and it's on you to get your job. And I thought like it's an awesome piece of advice. It was a little gruff, right? But it also kind of told myself like, yeah, people are going to pat you in the back. They respect that you served. Everyone loves the military, but at the end of the day, it's on you to create your own opportunity. So just always remember that that people maybe give you another point on a 100-point scale because they know you're going to show up on time, you're going to have the proper uniform on, right? But it's ultimately to open up doors, it's on you, and you got to remember that at the end of the day. And I thought it was, I think at the time he probably said it to me, and I was like, all right. But now that I think back on it, like 15 years later, it was kind of a pretty sound piece of advice. So I guess I'll just leave you with that, unless Ramona, nothing else, right?
No, just want to say thank
Okay.
you to everyone. I don't know, Keisha, if you wanted to say something, but thank you to everyone for your time,
Yeah. And
um,
Yeah,
Keisha, thank you for
and your insight.
organizing this. Like always, appreciate all you do. And for everyone attending, obviously appreciate my fellow sisters in arms. So, and hopefully this was helpful. So,
this was
Yes.
very much so helpful. So thank you all very much for your time. Thank you to Virtu for being our long-term partners. Hopefully everyone on this call is ready to interview, knows how to have a good resume, and also have some good HR understanding for what happens in the background, and get you all settled and ready for the workforce after service.
Great.
So thank you all so much for celebrating Women's History Month with us. This is not over. We have another class coming up next week. So if you're interested in joining us, we do have a financial class next week. But also if you want to celebrate with us some more this month, we have a virtual 5K. So happy to have anyone jump, swim, run, whatever it is you do, bike if you want to. My legs are done with running since the Marine Corps, so that's out. But thank you all so much for
Thank
your
you.
time, and thank you for feeding into women veterans in our community.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
All right, have a
everyone.
good evening.
thank
Thank
you.
Thank you,
you.
Bye
everyone.
bye.
Bye.
Good
Thank
luck.
you.
Bye.
Bye.